2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. A strange weekend of non-football related activities and maybe a little Army-Navy and some bad weather, amongst other things. And a trip to Cleveland this week. Luke Jones joins us now to discuss the discussion of the weekend, which, strangely enough, the abrupt release of Terrell Suggs from his responsibilities and duties with the Arizona Cardinals so that he could seek employment, hopefully, maybe, possibly, with the Baltimore Ravens. Boy, I heard all sorts of arguments. It made Twitter fun over the weekend, did it not?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I think there's very fair debate. First of all, let's remind everyone, Terrell Suggs is subject to waivers because we're talking post-trade deadline, and he was waived by the Cardinals. It's not a major financial commitment. I mean, you're talking about, I believe, a few $100,000. It would end up counting against the cap because most of his compensation for this season was in the form of a signing bonus. So we're not talking about a major cap commitment here. But as much as Terrell Suggs might want to rejoin the Baltimore Ravens, and there were reports over the weekend, Adam Schefter put out there that Suggs may not even report to another team if he were to be claimed by someone other than the Ravens, who are dead last in the waiver priority because, well, they have the best record in football. I think it's important to clear up that this isn't just a case of if Suggs wants it and if the Ravens want it, then it's going to happen, because you have lots of other playoff contenders that, A, could use a little bit of a hand from a pass rush perspective. Not that Terrell Suggs is 2011 version of himself, but if you need some depth at the edge defender position, someone who still plays the run well, someone who, if you limit his snap count, probably can give you a little bit of juice as a pass rusher. Although I think he only had 1.5 sack over the last 6 games he played for the Cardinals. But that's the first part of it. The second part of it is if you're one of these playoff contenders and Suggs has already put out there through back channels that he'd like to go back to the Ravens, and assuming the Ravens are interested in that, why as a playoff contender who would have a better waiver priority, why would you just why would you
allow it
with that, right?
Yes.
Why wouldn't you put in a claim even if Suggs says, I'm not going to play for you? Well, then you own his rights, and he's not going to go to the Ravens and make a 12-2 team, even if we're not talking about Terrell Suggs as an all-pro kind of talent anymore, but you can definitely make an argument that the Ravens could use him. Certainly they've had their issues with setting the edge from time to time, and we know Suggs is still good against the run. If you have him in a little more of a situational role, could he get after the quarterback? Sure. He could do that in a way that, at the very least, you point to some of the other guys that the Ravens have counted on at that spot and say, Terrell Suggs probably isn't Matthew Judon anymore. I think that's safe to say, but he could fit into that hierarchy as their second or third best pass rusher. And
well, the question is, do they want him around? I mean, this is a Harbaugh DaCosta wink. Do you want to invite that personality back in here right now at this tender moment for 2 games to go win a Super Bowl? Will he make you better or worse? And I mean, look, you and I have talked about this with like Chad Brown, who right around this time every year we get a call from Bill Belichick, right? And players of that ilk. Junior Seau was one of those guys at the end of his career that you would say, do you want this guy around or do you not? I haven't really put the film on with Terrell Suggs recently to say, like, what kind of a football player is he at this moment. I would never bet against him, though. But this is a fascinating little case study for the management of the Ravens and how Steve Bisciotti feels about this and Ozzie Newsome feels about this and Eric DeCock. Who's voting for it and who's voting against it? It'd be interesting to know. Because I don't think it's universal, like, hey, we just got to – I don't think he's Ray Lewis. I think he's Terrell Suggs.
Yeah, sure. But I also think, let's look at this from a logical standpoint. The Ravens wanted him back in March. I mean, they wanted him back. They were trying to re-sign him, and he ended up getting more money with the Arizona Cardinals. There was discussion as far as how contract talks had gone, going back to even the Combine and all of that. But it was clear the Ravens wanted him back, and they expected him back, and they were surprised when he left. So now that was, we're talking 8-9 months ago at this point. So that was a long time ago, and I think you do have to, with any player acquisition potentially, you are looking at what impact it's going to have on you from a chemistry standpoint. I think the overall sentiment in the Ravens locker room, I know Matthew Judon tweeted out almost immediately after the news had broken that Suggs was being waived he just said in a generic tweet, "Come back home." I think it was pretty clear who he was referring to there. So I think there is a fair question to ask, what are the expectations if you do bring him in from Terrell Suggs' perspective? Do you automatically assume you're going to be one of the faces of the locker room, the face of the defense? I think that would be that'd be something that would be a little more of a point of contention potentially. But if you're willing to come in and say, Wink, whatever role you have in mind for me, I'll do, whether that's playing 15 snaps, whether that's playing 40 snaps. As far as being a leader, this is Lamar Jackson's team. This is more Earl Thomas's team than mine at this point, or Matthew Judon, or whichever guys you want to name. I'll fit in the way that feels right for me and feels right for this football team. If Terrell Suggs feels that way, and I'm not sure there's any reason to think he wouldn't feel that way. I mean, it's not as though he was clashing with Ray Lewis 10, 12 years ago to be the face of the defense. He was the guy that deferred to Ray Lewis and deferred to Ed Reed. So a 37-year-old Terrell Suggs who has just been let go and has kind of been billed as a mutual thing, but you don't really know all the circumstances behind it. But if he's willing to come in and fit rather than the Ravens needing to cater to whatever he wants, then I think it can fit perfectly fine. I think it is fair to
Well, it's not a long-time marriage. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a Vegas wedding. You know what I mean? Like, it's Christmas week and the Super Bowl 6 weeks from now. I've done the math, right?
Right, and there's nothing long-term when you're a 37-year-old football player. I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, Terrell Suggs knows this is very well it for him. So whether it's with the Ravens, whether it's with Tennessee and a reunion with Dean Pease, whether it's with another contender claiming him, he has to make a decision here. Is he going to start over again on a very abbreviated schedule? And even coming back to the Ravens, it would be starting over a little bit.
Well, he signs with Tennessee, gets a chance to play more football because they'll play the first week of the playoffs.
Yeah, right. So, but I think but I also think the football side of this, beyond the business side and understanding that teams can put in a waiver claim for him, and this discussion could be completely dead by 4 o'clock Monday. I mean, that's just the way it is. But it is a case of how much does he have left? Because what have we talked about in recent years with Terrell Suggs? He would start out fast. You'd look at him the first 7 or 8 weeks. He'd look like he's on his way to a double-digit sack season. And then what would happen the second half of the season? He'd wear down.
Well, every September he'd remind you that he probably belongs in the Hall of Fame, right? Like, literally.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But you look at what he did over his last 6 weeks in Arizona, and part of that was he was playing a little bit less because, the Cardinals aren't going anywhere. They're not making the playoffs, and they want to look at some younger guys. So that was part of the genesis of the two sides talking about this, Cliff Kingsbury and him, at least according to Kingsbury, that they talked about it, and it actually ended up being a little bit more of a mutual thing because I think Suggs saw the writing on the wall there as far as what their objectives were and thought, if I can get back to the Ravens, hopefully, or if it ends up being another playoff contender putting in a claim, then I'll go and do that. Now, I would assume if it's a lesser team, for whatever the reason, would put in a claim for him. If the Cincinnati Bengals put in a claim for Terrell Suggs, I'm guessing he's going to say, see ya, I'm going home. But if it's another contender that's not the Ravens,
I just can't imagine anybody, just the other teams, just letting Terrell Suggs come back to Baltimore if they really believe he can play. If the Buffalo Bills feel like he's going to line up 23 snaps against them 3 weeks from now, over $300,000, they're going to say, Terrell, put on a blue helmet. You know what I mean? Like, that's the league, right?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, let's put it put the shoe on the other foot here. Put yourself in the opposite.
Yeah, we're just going to let J.J. Watt go back to Houston and kick our ass or something, right?
Yeah, well, how about this one? And it's not happening, and it wouldn't be applicable. But let's say Rob Gronkowski wanted to come back, but there was some weird rule that he had to go through waivers, and for whatever reason, the Ravens.
Yeah, he's not coming back week 3 of January here. Not here.
well, right. I mean, you're not letting him go back to New England if you have some way to block it. So, I think that's where you look at this and say, it'll be interesting to see what teams think he can still play or what team says, I'm not sure he can play, but I sure as heck don't want him to get to Baltimore because I know that some of the issues that they have had with stopping the run, setting the edge, and they haven't had a great pass rush unless they're so reliant on the blitz that if they add Suggs, it's not going to make them dramatically better, but it might make them a little bit better. And we're already talking about how are we going to beat those guys in January. So that's where I keep looking at this and saying I have a tough time believing there isn't at least one or two other contenders that would put in a claim.
It's hilarious, though, right? He walks in, he gets himself released, right? He walks out the door, he tweets up that, and everybody in the media is like, he'll only play for the Ravens, right? So, a whole weekend long we're talking about this, like the Chiefs are just going to let that happen. I just the more I think about it, I mean, if he winds up here this week because everybody else, matadored this and said, old man, go back to Baltimore, good luck. I mean, after hearing everyone speak about the Ravens in these, they can't lose, and hey, Ness, you better go down to Florida and get some hotel rooms together, and because we're going to the Super Bowl, that's without him. And then the notion that they would actually want him back, I don't really know that they feel like they need Terrell Suggs right now, or that they want to welcome that personality in organizationally. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I don't know that it'll come to that, but. Dude, life is very, very strange, right? Like, I've seen all of this, right? Right to the deer antler spray with Ray Lewis years ago and everything else in between, right? That if on Wednesday I walk in there and he's sitting in there blasting his music and, showing his backside, I mean, I would just say I've seen stranger things, but it would shock me, given the competitive environment of the league, that Bill Belichick would allow that.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I've heard some people, and I even had a couple people pose this to me or via Twitter, say, well, keep in mind, when you put in a waiver claim, you have to submit the player that you're going to let go, whether you're letting them go or whether you're going to place someone on IR. And I said to him, look, let's face it, the Ravens are the best team in football right now, but if we, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to sound like I'm being personal, but there's 5 or 6 guys at the bottom of the roster right now that if the Ravens said, we're letting that player go, you wouldn't bat an eyelash. So that whole thing about it being a risk that you're going to lose someone else if you claim Terrell Suggs and he doesn't report, I kind of feel like, well, then so be it. You've blocked him from going to the Ravens at the very least. So I'm with you. I still think for as much as we can talk about fit and how he would fit in here and how many snaps he might play and how much he has left, unless he is just so done in the eyes of talent evaluators. And then that's where you would ask, do the Ravens think he's done? And unless that's the case, I have a hard time trying to fathom that there wouldn't be at least one other team that would say, we'll try to get Terrell Suggs to play for us, and at the very least, he won't play for the Ravens, and that's not going to make the best team even 1% better, potentially.
Well, if you look at the Damata Pekka situation, right? Like, these guys, they exist, right? Josh Bynes might have still been sitting out right now, right?
Sure.
Like, so, and he's had a hell of a season. Like, he's been very worthy of earning a salary and being in the league and being on the field and has earned his snaps on the best team in football. But all that being said, Damata Pekka didn't want to go play for the Jets or the Dolphins or, what I mean? Like, once you've cashed enough checks in this league, the game's hard enough. You want to put yourself in a position to win. And I guess that's where Bill Belichick has exploited that at various points. We talked about Chad Brown and Junior Seau and the Randy Mosses and, all of those guys years ago. I mean, I'm watching Josh Gordon run around catching balls. I mean, I'm watching Joe Hayden make big plays after the Browns gave up on him. So, there are guys into their 30s that are available and on a rental basis. I mean, Dwight Freeney was renting himself out for years, right? Julius Peppers, right? When you have a skill set like that. So, I would think 6 teams in the playoff picture could use Terrell Suggs this weekend, right?